Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we like to dig into the most unexpected stuff we can find in a mountain of information.
Sounds fun.
Today we've got financial news, analyst discussions, even some stuff from Reddit's earnings call.
Really? Reddit's earnings call, huh?
And we're looking for those kind of outlier trends, those things that make you stop and say, wait, what?
I'm in for a wild ride then. We're going to cover everything from companies like Reddit and how they're dealing with things like algorithms and AI, all the way to what's making Wall Street nervous.
Oh, and we've got to talk about Bros Coffee. Apparently, some people are spending an insane amount of money on that sugary caffeine fix.
Yeah, that one definitely caught my eye too. We've also got some experts weighing in on why Wednesdays might just be the luckiest day of the week for investors, and some pretty interesting thoughts on how subjective factors are influencing Wall Street.
Okay, so you ready to dive in?
Absolutely, let's do it.
Let's start with inflation. There's this analysis from Housing Wire that really got me thinking. It seems like January's Consumer Price Index, or CPI, was hotter than expected, which could mean mortgage rates are going to go even higher.
Interesting, because the Federal Reserve, they seem to be pretty sure that we're going to see disinflation, especially when it comes to housing. But when you look at what's happening in the real world, it's a different story. The Housing Wire analyst pointed out that the Fed's index for shelter costs, which basically means how much housing costs, actually went negative recently. But that optimism, you're not seeing it in the CPI data.
So for someone like me just trying to buy a home, what does this actually mean? Is it really as bad as it sounds?
It definitely makes things more complicated, that's for sure. One financial expert we looked at really emphasized being careful of budgeting if you're thinking about a mortgage these days, especially because things like insurance and property taxes, they can change all the time. They suggested a 1% rule to estimate what owning a home would cost you. Basically, you multiply the home's value by 1% to get an idea of the annual cost. Then you can compare that to how much you'd pay for rent.
Okay, I see. But isn't that kind of oversimplifying things? Property taxes and insurance could be totally different depending on where you live, right?
You're absolutely right. It's more of a starting point, a rough estimate. You definitely can't use it instead of doing a full analysis that takes those local differences into account. And, speaking of things that could be problems later on, one analyst actually said that in like 10 to 15 years, it might be almost impossible to get a mortgage or even insurance in some parts of the country because of climate change and shifts in the economy.
Whoa, that's a little scary to think about. And while we're on the topic of things to be worried about, we got some insights from some big names in private credit about what keeps them up at night. Surprisingly, it's not just inflation.
Right. One expert talked about declining population growth, especially in developed countries. They said it could really slow down economic growth. Apparently, it's because of lower fertility rates, and people are working longer before they retire. For investors, fewer people means less demand for goods and services, and that can affect how much profit companies make.
That makes sense. So they're not just worried about their own investments, they're worried about the companies they invest in losing customers. Couldn't immigration help offset some of those population losses, though?
It's definitely being talked about, but it's a big, complicated issue, not just about economics, but also about society and politics. And on the topic of subjective factors influencing the markets, we've got some pretty thought-provoking commentary about how those elements are sneaking into how Wall Street makes decisions.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting. What did they say about that?
One expert we talked to argued that all the political polarization and misinformation out there, it's making it harder and harder for investors to stay objective. They brought up something called the recession obsession that was happening from 2022 to 2024. Back then, lots of investors were totally convinced a recession was coming, even though the economic data was actually strong. This expert thinks Wall Street's biggest challenge now is figuring out how to deal with all the subjectivity and still be seen as a reliable source of objective analysis.
So it's not just about numbers anymore. Emotions and opinions are playing a bigger role. That sounds like a slippery slope.
Definitely raises some concerns about what will happen to financial markets in the long run if decisions are based more on personal biases than on real data.
Okay, enough doom and gloom for now. Let's switch gears and talk about Reddit. Their earnings call revealed some pretty interesting insights into how they're adapting in this ever-changing digital world, especially with AI becoming such a big thing.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Instead of trying to go head-to-head with the big search engines like Google, they're playing to their strengths, focusing on how their community-driven content can make money through search. People go to Reddit for specific answers from real people with real experience. It's like a giant knowledge base, but it's built by the crowd.
So they're carving out their own space in the search market. Pretty smart, but Are they actually making money from this?
Oh yeah, they're seeing some serious growth in advertising revenue, particularly from those performance ads. Almost 60% of their revenue now comes from that. And their CEO, Steve Huffman, he talked about how committed they are to using both commercial and open source AI models to make their platform even better.
Hold on. Open source AI models. What does that even mean?
Open source AI models, well, it's basically AI systems where anyone can see, use, change, and share the code. Imagine a cake recipe that anyone can use. The cakes will turn out different depending on what ingredients you use and how good of a baker you are. In this case, Reddit is putting their faith in the power of their community to actually improve their AI through these open source models.
That's so interesting. It seems like they're embracing AI, not running scared from it. What else did Huffman have to say?
Well, he believes that eventually everyone will be able to access this kind of technology. It'll be like a commodity, which could actually level the playing field for smaller companies. So those powerful AI tools won't just be in the hands of the big tech giants. Anyone will be able to use them, and that could lead to a ton of new innovations.
Now, that's an optimistic way to look at it, especially we were just talking about how people are worried AI will take away jobs.
It is an interesting contrast, isn't it? On the one hand, we're concerned about AI's impact on jobs, and on the other, we have companies like Reddit actively embracing it and making it more accessible to everyone. This whole episode seems to be about this dance between anxiety and opportunity, with all these outlier trends and events pointing to a future that's anything but predictable.
It certainly keeps things interesting. But hey, before we get too philosophical about AI, let's talk about those lucky Wednesdays. We've got data that shows if you look at the Wednesday returns of the S&P 500 so far this year and annualize it, we're talking a crazy 142% return.
Now, that's an outlier statistic if I've ever seen one. Of course, we know past performance doesn't guarantee future results, but it does make you wonder, right?
Definitely. Is there something special about Wednesdays? Could it be that more earnings reports are released midweek, which is driving those gains? Or is it just pure luck?
It's a bit of a mystery, really. Maybe it's market psychology, maybe it's random, but it's a fun fact to think about.
Speaking of fun and kind of bizarre facts, did you hear about this Bros coffee phenomenon? Apparently, some people are spending hundreds, even thousands of dollars every month on it.
Yeah. Bros Coffee reported record revenue and earnings in their latest report, and their stock is through the roof. Their strategy seems to be working, target high-traffic areas and offer tons of customizable, super sweet drinks. They've definitely found their audience.
You mean those Silicon Valley tech bros who fuel their all-nighters with sugar and caffeine? It's amazing what people will spend money on.
It really is. It shows that even in a market that seems totally saturated, like coffee, there's always room for someone new if they can find their niche and cater to a specific group.
I guess there's something to be said for specialization. Speaking of niches, one expert we talked to thinks the future of work, especially in fields like software development, might not be about fearing obsolescence, but about figuring out how to work with AI.
Right, the idea is to become these AI whisperers or prompt engineers. They'll be the ones who guide and refine what the AI produces to create something even more valuable. It's about understanding what AI is good at and what its limits are, and then using its power while still relying on human creativity and critical thinking.
So it's not man versus machine, but man with machine, working together to achieve something neither could do on their own.
Exactly. It's about using the tools we have in new and innovative ways. Just like Bros Coffee found a way to stand out in a crowded market, the people who can adapt and innovate will be the ones who thrive in this new world.
It's like that saying, it's not about the tools, it's about the craftsman. And maybe the people who master these new AI tools will be the master craftsmen of the future.
Well said. And as we've seen throughout this deep dive, the future is probably going to be shaped by those who can adapt, innovate, and find those hidden opportunities within all the chaos.
Absolutely. But before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, let's switch gears to the world of energy. We got some analysis on Fluence Energy, a company that specializes in battery storage. Some people are saying they could be a big player in the changing energy landscape.
Fluence is interesting because they're right at the intersection of two huge trends, like the growth of renewable energy and the growing need for energy storage to keep the power grid reliable.
I've seen people calling them a potential 10x opportunity. What's making them so optimistic?
There are a few things that are driving that optimism, like the overall growth of the energy storage market. That's happening because we need a way to balance the intermittent nature of renewable sources like solar and wind. Plus, Fluence has some pretty solid partnerships with big players in the industry like Siemens and AES. And on top of that, they just got a new CEO with tons of experience in emerging markets. That could open up a lot of new avenues for growth.
Sounds pretty promising, but I'm also seeing some cautionary notes out there. What are the potential risks with Fluence?
Well, there are definitely concerns about the battery storage market becoming commoditized and about how hard it's going to be to consistently make a profit in an industry that's changing so rapidly.
So it's your classic risk versus reward scenario.
Exactly. And one of the analysts we talked to made a really interesting comparison between Fluence and Tesla. They said both companies are really pushing the boundaries of innovation in their respective industries.
Ah, Tesla, the company you either love or hate. What's the connection?
Both companies are betting on disruptive technologies with the potential to fundamentally change their industries. Fluence with their battery storage solutions, and Tesla with their electric vehicles and renewable energy initiatives. And they're both facing similar challenges when it comes to scaling up production, keeping costs under control, and navigating all those regulations that are changing all the time.
It'll be interesting to see how it all plays out. But speaking of Tesla, we can't ignore Elon Musk and what he's been saying about Dogecoin and how it could, totally revolutionize finance.
Yeah, his claim that more people using Dogecoin will lead to lower long-term treasury yields and therefore low interest rates on things like mortgages, business loans, and credit cards definitely raised a few eyebrows.
Hold on. He's suggesting that a meme-based cryptocurrency could influence U.S. monetary policy?
That's what it sounded like, even though most economists would probably disagree. But it does show how much influence cryptocurrencies are gaining and the potential they have to disrupt traditional financial systems.
It's definitely a trend worth keeping an eye on, even if I'm not quite ready to bet my retirement savings on Dogecoin just yet.
Agreed. But as we've seen throughout this deep dive, the future is often shaped by those who are brave enough to challenge conventional wisdom and explore the unknown. Whether it's Elon Musk making bold bets on cryptocurrencies and AI, or companies like Fluence Energy pushing the limits of energy storage, the key is to be open to new possibilities and willing to take calculated risks.
And who knows, maybe those risks will pay off big, just like those lucky Wednesdays we were talking about earlier.
Speaking of which, another interesting outlier statistic we came across relates to how the S&P 500 performs on different days of the week. Historically, Tuesdays have been the worst performing day, while Fridays have been the best.
So maybe those midweek earnings reports aren't the whole story after all. It seems like there might be a deeper pattern at play here, even if nobody can say for sure what's driving it.
It's a good reminder that even in a world driven by data, there are still mysteries and anomalies that we can't easily explain.
Okay, before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, let's shift our focus to the world of politics and policy. We've got some analysis here on the potential impact of tariffs on different industries, from making cars to producing eggs.
Tariffs are a complex issue with all sorts of potential consequences, both good and bad. On the one hand, they can be used to protect domestic industries and jobs. But on the other hand, they can lead to higher prices for consumers and disrupt global supply chains.
Sounds like a tricky balancing act. Are there any specific examples of how tariffs have impacted businesses and consumers?
There's a report that says tariffs on imported auto parts could make car repairs more expensive for consumers. And we've seen how tariffs on goods from China have led to price increases on everything from electronics to clothes.
And I'm guessing consumers aren't the only ones feeling the pain.
Right. There was another report that highlights how tariffs on steel and aluminum are affecting the construction industry, making building materials more expensive. The agricultural sector has been hit especially hard by tariffs, with tariffs on soybeans hurting American farmers and messing up global trade patterns.
It seems like tariffs are a double-edged sword. It's important to carefully weigh the potential costs and benefits before putting them into place.
Absolutely. And as we've seen throughout this deep dive, the global economy is so interconnected that any policy decision, whether it's about tariffs, interest rates, or cryptocurrency regulation, can have ripple effects that reach far and wide. And those effects are often unpredictable.
It's like we're all part of one giant web, and even the smallest tug can send ripples through the entire system.
Well said. Now, before we move on to the next part of our deep dive, let's take a moment to acknowledge the human element in all of these complex systems. We've got some stories about individuals and communities who are navigating these turbulent times in truly remarkable ways.
I always find those stories so inspiring. They remind us that even when things are uncertain and disruptive, there's always hope and resilience.
Exactly. And those stories are often where we find the most inspiring and insightful lessons about how to thrive in a world where everything seems to be constantly changing. So let's dive into those stories and see what we can learn.
Sounds good to me. Let's take a closer look at how people are adapting, innovating, and creating their own paths forward in this ever-evolving world.
And who knows, maybe we'll even find some hidden gems of wisdom that can help us all navigate these uncertain times with a little more grace and a lot more optimism.
I'm all for that. Let's jump right in.
All right, first up, we've got a fascinating conversation with Ralph Sampson, a former NBA star, and Jelani Jenkins, a former NFL player, about their experiences transitioning to new careers after their time in professional sports.
That's really relevant to our discussion about AI and the changing job market. What were some of the key takeaways from that conversation?
One of the main points they emphasized was the importance of being coachable and open to new experiences. They both talked about how their athletic backgrounds had instilled in them a strong work ethic and a willingness to be coached, which they found to be invaluable assets in their new careers.
That makes sense. Being able to take direction and learn from others is essential in any field, especially when you're transitioning to something completely new. But professional athletes are used to being at the top of their game. Was it difficult for them to adjust to being, well, rookies again?
They were very honest about the challenges they faced. They both talked about having to overcome their egos and be willing to start from scratch. They had to learn new skills, adapt to new environments, and build new relationships. But ultimately, their willingness to be coached and their determination to succeed helped them make the transition.
It's inspiring to hear how they were able to leverage their athletic experience to succeed in completely different fields. Did they have any advice for others facing similar transitions?
They both stressed the importance of finding mentors and building relationships with people who could guide them and offer support. They acknowledged that they had to rely on the expertise of others to learn the ropes in their new fields.
It's a good reminder that we don't have to figure everything out on our own. There's always someone who's been there before and can offer valuable insights and guidance.
Exactly. They also emphasized staying true to their passions and finding work that was both challenging and fulfilling. They talked about how they had to experiment and try different things before finding their true calling.
I think that's a key message for anyone facing career uncertainty, whether it's because of AI or other factors. It's about being proactive, exploring options, and finding work that aligns with your values and interests.
Absolutely. And as we've seen throughout this deep dive, adaptability, resilience, and a willingness to embrace the unknown are essential qualities for navigating these turbulent times.
Now let's move on to another story of innovation and entrepreneurship. We've got a report about a company that's developing a new type of solar panel that's more efficient and affordable than traditional models.
That's fantastic. We need more innovations like that to address the climate crisis and transition to a more sustainable energy future.
Absolutely. What makes their technology so unique?
They've developed a new type of solar cell that uses a different material than those traditional silicon-based cells. This new material is more efficient at converting sunlight into electricity, and it's also less expensive to produce.
So it's a win-win for both the environment and consumers.
Exactly. And what's really inspiring about this company is that they're not just focused on profit, they're committed to making their technology accessible to communities around the world. They're working on developing off-grid solar systems that can provide clean, affordable energy to people in remote areas who don't have access to traditional power grids.
That's a great example of how business can be a force for good in the world. And it's encouraging to see that even in a challenging economic environment, there are still entrepreneurs who are willing to take risks and invest in groundbreaking technologies.
It's a reminder that even in the midst of uncertainty and upheaval, there's always hope and the potential for positive change.
Well said. Before we wrap up this part of our deep dive, let's take a moment to reflect on the broader implications of the trends and events we've discussed so far. What are some key takeaways you'd like to highlight?
I think the overarching theme here is that we're living in a time of unprecedented change and complexity. The forces of globalization, technological innovation, and all the social and political upheaval are converging in ways that are reshaping our world at an accelerating pace.
It could definitely feel overwhelming at times. How do we even make sense of it all?
It's important to remember that with change comes opportunity. The challenges we're facing today are also creating new possibilities for innovation, collaboration, and progress.
That's a hopeful perspective. So how can we best position ourselves to navigate these turbulent times and harness the opportunities that are emerging?
I think the key is to cultivate a mindset of adaptability, resilience, and lifelong learning. We need to be willing to embrace new ideas, challenge conventional wisdom, and constantly expand our knowledge and skills.
So it's about becoming lifelong learners, constantly adapting to the evolving landscape, and seeking out new opportunities for growth.
Exactly. And we also need to remember the importance of human connection and collaboration. The challenges we're facing are too complex for any one individual or organization to solve alone. We need to work together, share our knowledge and resources, and support each other through these times of transition.
Even a world that's increasingly interconnected through technology, The human element remains essential.
Absolutely. And as we've seen throughout this deep dive, it's often in the stories of individual resilience, innovation, and compassion that we find the most inspiring and hopeful examples of how to navigate these uncertain times.
Well said. Now, before we move on to the next part of our deep dive, let's take a quick break to clear our heads and prepare for the next round of insights and discoveries.
Sounds like a good plan. We'll be back soon to delve even deeper into the fascinating and often surprising trends that are shaping our world.
Stay tuned, folks. We've got a lot more ground to cover,
Welcome back to the deep dive.
where we're, digging into all those outlier trends and events that are shaping the world around us.
Yeah, and unearthing all those little nuggets of knowledge that make you go, huh, never thought of it that way.
Exactly. And in this segment, we're going to shift gears a bit and explore the world of consumer behavior. We're seeing some fascinating and sometimes confusing patterns emerging.
Like what?
Well, for examples, we've got some data here about this whole subscription fatigue thing. Apparently, consumers are feeling totally overwhelmed by all the subscription services they've signed up for.
Oh, yeah, I get that. Feels like every app and website wants you to pay a monthly fee these days.
Right. And it's easy to lose track of what you're even paying for, and then those charges start adding up. It's like, wait, what?
Exactly. Subscription models can be super convenient and they often offer good value, but there's a point where it just becomes too much to handle.
Especially when you forget what you're even subscribed to and all those recurring charges start piling up.
Right, and now we're seeing some pushback from consumers who are starting to prioritize value and simplicity over having a million options.
So does that mean we're going to see a shift away from subscriptions and back towards more traditional taper-use or one-time purchase models?
It's hard to say for sure, but there are signs that the subscription craze might be cooling off a bit. Consumers are getting more careful with their money.
Makes sense. It's like a pendulum swinging back towards a more balanced approach.
Speaking of balance, we've got some interesting insights about what's going on in the retail industry. We're seeing a blurring of the lines between online and offline experiences.
Oh, you mean that whole omni-channel thing everyone's talking about?
Exactly. Retailers are realizing that they need to create seamless experiences for customers no matter how they interact with the brand, whether it's online, in-store, or even through customer service.
It's about meeting customers where they are and providing a consistent experience regardless of how they choose to engage.
Right, and we're seeing some really creative approaches to this, like using augmented reality to let customers virtually try on clothes, or creating personalized recommendations based on what they've bought before.
Wow, that's pretty cool. Seems like retailers are really having to up their game to compete with the convenience and personalization that online giants like Amazon offer.
Definitely. And it's making the retail landscape much more dynamic and engaging for consumers.
Well, I like to shop both online and in person, so as long as it's a good experience, I'm all for it.
Me too. It's about finding that sweet spot where technology enhances the human experience rather than replacing it altogether.
And speaking of technology-enhancing experiences, there are some cool things happening in the entertainment industry, with streaming services trying out new formats and interactive features.
Right, we're starting to move away from that old passive viewing experience and towards more immersive and engaging content.
Like those choose-your-own-adventure type shows where viewers get to make decisions that affect the plot.
Exactly, and we're also seeing more virtual reality and augmented reality experiences that blur the lines between entertainment and real life.
Sounds like the future of entertainment is going to be a wild ride.
It definitely does, and all this new technology creates exciting opportunities for storytellers and content creators to push the boundaries and try new things.
Well, I love all kinds of entertainment, so I'm definitely excited to see what they come up with next.
Me too. It's a great time to be a consumer with so much innovation and creativity happening in every industry.
But with all this change and disruption going on, it's easy to feel overwhelmed and uncertain about what the future holds.
That's true, but it's important to remember that even in the midst of all this chaos, there are still constants and principles that can guide us.
Like what?
Well, for one, the importance of human connection and community is stronger than ever.
I agree. In a world that's becoming more and more digitized and automated, it's essential to nurture our relationships and build strong communities.
Exactly, and we see this reflected in the growing popularity of social media platforms that are all about community and shared experiences.
Like online groups and forums where people connect over shared interests, hobbies, or even just a sense of humor.
You got it. These platforms are giving people a sense of belonging and connection, which is so important in a world that can often feel isolating.
And those platforms can create opportunities for people to learn from each other, share ideas, and support one another through tough times.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that even in the digital age, human connection is at the core of what helps us thrive.
Speaking of thriving, there's been a lot of interesting research in the field of positive psychology. It's all about human strengths and well-being.
Right. This field is all about understanding what makes people happy, resilient, and fulfilled, and then using those insights to help individuals and organizations thrive.
So it's not just about fixing what's broken, but also about nurturing what's working well and helping people reach their full potential.
Exactly. And we're seeing some really cool applications of positive psychology in areas like education, healthcare, and business.
Such as, give me some examples.
Well, for instance, schools are starting to use positive psychology principles to make learning environments more supportive and engaging. Healthcare providers are using it to help patients deal with stress and chronic illnesses. And businesses are using it to boost employee morale and productivity.
Wow, those sound like really positive developments, pun intended.
Yeah, no kidding. It's a good reminder that even when we face challenges, there's always room for growth, resilience, and well-being.
And speaking of resilience, we've got some data here about how people are coping with the effects of climate change, from extreme weather events to rising sea levels.
Yeah, climate change is a huge problem. It's affecting communities all over the world, and it's forcing us to ask some tough questions about how we live on this planet.
It feels as such a daunting challenge, but I'm also seeing stories about amazing resilience and innovation as people come up with creative ways to adapt and reduce the impacts.
That's true. We're seeing communities come together to rebuild after natural disasters, entrepreneurs creating new technologies to cut down on carbon emissions, and activists raising awareness and pushing policymakers to take action.
It's a reminder that even when we're facing a global crisis, there's still hope, and the power of human ingenuity and collective action can make a difference.
Speaking of collective action, there are some interesting things happening in the world of social and political movements. We're seeing a resurgence of activism and engagement around issues like social justice, economic inequality, and environmental protection.
It seems like people are realizing they have a voice and that they can actually make a difference.
Exactly, and that's reflected in things like online petitions, social media campaigns, and grassroots organizing efforts, all of which are gaining popularity.
It's empowering to see people coming together to demand change and hold those in power accountable.
It really is, and it reminds us that even when the world feels divided and polarized, there's still a shared desire for a more just and equitable society.
Well said. Before we move on to the final part of our deep dive, let's take a moment to acknowledge how interconnected all these trends and events really are.
You're absolutely right. It's crucial to remember that none of these issues exist in a vacuum. They're all part of a web of interconnected systems.
Like how climate change is making social and economic inequalities worse, or how technological advances are creating opportunities but also raising ethical concerns.
Exactly. We can't just focus on one thing in isolation. We have to think systemically and consider the ripple effects of our actions.
It's also a reminder that the solutions to these challenges will probably be multifaceted and require collaboration.
I agree. We have to break down silos, find ways to bridge divides, and work together to create a future that's more just, sustainable, and prosperous for everyone.
Well said. Now let's take a deep breath and get ready to dive into the final part of our exploration. We'll bring all these insights together and explore some potential ways forward.
Sounds like a plan. Let's see where this journey takes us next.
I'm ready. Let's go. Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive, where we've been exploring those outlier trends and events that are shaping our world.
We've talked about a lot today, from the economic jitters around inflation and AI to inspiring stories about people being resilient and coming up with incredible innovations.
It's been quite a journey. Now it's time to put all those insights together and think about some possible paths forward.
Yeah, let's zoom out a bit. What are the overarching trends shaping the world right now?
It feels like a question with 1,000 answers. Where do we even begin?
Well, I think one of the biggest ones is how quickly technology is changing, especially in fields like artificial intelligence, automation, and biotechnology.
It really does feel like there's a new breakthrough every day, and it's changing how we live, work, and connect with each other.
Exactly, and all this rapid change brings both opportunities and challenges, right?
Absolutely. On the one hand, AI could help us solve some of the world's toughest problems, like climate change and disease.
But on the other hand, we have to think about the ethical implications of these technologies and make sure they're used for good, not for harm.
It's a delicate balance. We need to be both visionary and practical. What other big trends are shaping things?
Another one is how interconnected everything is becoming. It's not just about globalization or economics, but also how information, ideas, and even culture are flowing across borders.
The internet and social media have made it so much easier to connect with people all over the world.
Exactly, but this interconnectedness is a double-edged sword. While it creates opportunities for collaboration and understanding, it also comes with challenges related to conflict, inequality, and the spread of misinformation.
It's true. We need to be globally minded, but also locally rooted. What else is playing a role in shaping the world today?
There's a growing awareness of social and environmental problems. Issues like climate change, social justice, and economic inequality are becoming impossible to ignore.
And people are demanding solutions.
Right, we're seeing a surge in activism, social movements, and a push for businesses and governments to be more socially and environmentally responsible.
It's a wake-up call, but also an opportunity to build a world that's more just, sustainable, and equitable. So given all of this, what are some potential paths forward? Where do we go from here?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? It's easy to feel overwhelmed by it all.
I know I do sometimes, but I also believe that we have the power to shape the future. It's just hard to see how sometimes. What's the first step?
One of the most important things we can do is cultivate a mindset of adaptability, resilience, and lifelong learning.
So we need to be open to new ideas, challenge our assumptions, and never stop learning and growing.
Absolutely. The world is changing faster than ever before, and the only way to keep up is to be a lifelong learner.
A college degree or trade certification isn't enough anymore. We have to constantly update our skills and knowledge to stay relevant.
And be adaptable and resilient. Things will change, plans will fall apart, and unexpected challenges will pop up. The key is to bounce back, learn from our mistakes, and keep moving forward.
It's about having that growth mindset, right? Seeing challenges as opportunities to learn and grow.
Exactly. And another crucial path forward is focusing on collaboration and community.
We can't solve these huge problems on our own. We need to work together, share our knowledge and resources, and support each other.
We need to break down those silos, build bridges across divides, and find some common ground.
It's about recognizing our shared humanity and working together to create a better world for everyone. Okay, but before we wrap up, I have to ask, what role does hope play in all of this? It's easy to get bogged down in all the negativity.
Hope is essential. We can't let ourselves get trapped in the doom and gloom. We have to believe that a better future is possible.
It's easy to feel powerless sometimes. But you're right, hope isn't naive. It's what fuels us to take action.
Hope is powerful. It can help us overcome challenges and create real positive change. It's about believing in a better world and working towards it, even when things seem tough.
So as we wrap up our deep dive today, let's remember the power of adaptability, collaboration, and hope. And let's never underestimate the power of human ingenuity to shake the future.
It's been an amazing conversation. I hope our listeners feel inspired and ready to tackle the challenges and opportunities that lie ahead.
Me too. As we all head back out into the world with this new knowledge and understanding, let's commit to making a positive difference.
Let's be the change we want to see.
And let's never stop exploring, learning, and growing.
Until next time, happy exploring.
And keep diving deep.